My name is Elara Wynn. I'm 29 years old, and it's 2023 here in Manchester. You know that feeling when your world looks perfect, almost too perfect, like a picture you're afraid to touch in case it breaks. That was my life, until the night I saw something that changed everything I believed about love, loyalty, and trust. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic. It was a quiet moment, one that tore everything apart in silence. Stay with me till the end, because sometimes the softest heartbreaks tell the loudest stories. And if you believe silence can be stronger than revenge, subscribe for more stories like mine. Manchester always looked different at sunrise. The soft drizzle tapping against my kitchen window, the distant hum of buses outside, and the faint smell of coffee brewing. It was ordinary, peaceful, and mine. I used to think peace meant everything was okay. Now I know, peace can also mean you've stopped asking the questions you're afraid to hear the answers to. Ethan Cole, my fiancé, was already gone when I woke up. As always, he left early for work. A note on the counter, a kiss on the cheek before sunrise, and a promise. "I'll be home by 8, love. Don't wait up if I'm late." At first, I found that sweet. Dedication, ambition, the kind of traits you admire in someone you plan to spend your life with. But lately, the word late had begun to sound heavier. I glanced at his note and smiled, trying not to think too much. We'd been together for 5 years, engaged for 1. Everyone said we were perfect. The kind of couple people post about, all smiles and sunsets. And maybe that's what we were, until I realized how easy it is to mistake consistency for honesty. That morning, I walked into my office, a small architecture firm on Deansgate, carrying a coffee in one hand and a list of deadlines in the other. Work was my escape. Design made sense to me. Blueprints, measurements, plans, everything fit where it belonged. Unlike life, which never really did. "Morning, Elara," said Mia, my colleague, her tone light. She was the type who always noticed things, the kind of friend who'd look into your eyes and see the truth before you said a word. "You look tired. Late night again." I hesitated. "Ethan, been working late. I just couldn't sleep." She smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile, more sympathetic. "Be careful not to lose yourself trying to keep someone else." Her words stayed with me all day. It wasn't the first time someone hinted that something felt off. But love, real love, I thought meant faith. You don't start digging for dirt just because you see a shadow. That evening, I waited for Ethan. Dinner on the table, candles lit, the same way I always did when I wanted to remind us both what we were fighting for. The clock ticked past 8, then 9, then 10:30. My phone buzzed. "Sorry, love. Meeting ran late again. I'll be home after midnight. Don't wait up." I stared at the screen. No heart emoji this time. "No, miss you." Just words, cold, mechanical, detached. For the first time, I didn't reply. Instead, I walked over to the window. Outside, the rain had started to fall, washing the city in silver. It looked beautiful and lonely. There's a kind of ache that doesn't hurt physically, but eats away at your calm. That night, I slept alone, listening to the rain, pretending it was enough company. The next morning, I found Ethan still asleep on the sofa. His shirt half-buttoned, his briefcase on the floor, and a faint smell of perfume that wasn't mine lingering in the air. It wasn't strong, just enough to whisper questions I wasn't ready to ask. "Rough night," I said softly. He blinked awake, startled. "Elara, yeah, meeting went longer than expected. Crashed here so I wouldn't wake you." He smiled, that same charming smile that once made me fall in love. And for a second, I wanted to believe it again. Because believing is easier than breaking. I brushed his hair back, nodding. "All right, I'll make coffee." And that was it. No fight, no tears. Just silence. Because silence, I thought, keeps the peace, even when the truth is burning underneath it. Later that week, life carried on. We laughed, we talked, we made plans. He promised a weekend away after his next project. And I let myself believe it, because hope is the last thing that dies in a heart that loves. But something inside me had shifted. A quiet awareness. I began noticing the little things. How he looked at his phone before answering, how his messages turned shorter, colder. The man I loved was still there, but his eyes carried someone else's reflection. One Thursday evening, I stayed late at work myself. As I packed my bag, Mia walked in, holding 2 cups of tea. "You okay?" she asked again. "I'm fine," I lied. She placed the cup beside me. "You don't have to be fine all the time, you know. Strong women aren't the ones who never break. They're the ones who break quietly and rebuild even stronger." I smiled faintly. "You should write that down." She shrugged. "Maybe I already have." That weekend, I decided to surprise Ethan at his office. He'd left his lunch behind, another small excuse to see him, to feel close again. The building looked empty when I arrived. Lights flickered in the hallway, only a few desks were lit. "Ethan Cole's office," I asked the security guard. He looked puzzled. "Cole, he hasn't been in today, said he was working remotely." I froze. "Are you sure?" He nodded. "Positive, haven't seen him since Wednesday." My heart sank. I walked back to my car, the lunchbox still in my hand, the rain beginning to fall again, almost poetic, like the city knew something I didn't. I didn't call him. Didn't text. Just drove, aimlessly, through the streets we once called ours. And somewhere between the red lights and the raindrops, I realized. Sometimes, love doesn't die in explosions. It fades quietly, until the silence between 2 people is louder than anything they've ever said. That night, I couldn't sleep. Something inside whispered, "Look closer, Elara." But I wasn't ready. Not yet. Because deep down, I already knew. The truth was coming. And it wouldn't knock softly. There's something about Friday nights in Manchester. The city glows differently. The streetlights shimmer on wet pavements. Laughter floats through the air from every bar and cafe, and for a while, you can almost believe life is perfect again. That evening, I told myself I'd stop overthinking. Maybe Ethan really was just overworked. Maybe I was letting my insecurities whisper too loudly. So I decided to meet my friend Isla. She'd been asking for weeks to catch up. 7 sharp at Cafe Orla, she'd said on the phone. And Elara, wear something that says I'm done waiting. I laughed, but deep down, part of me knew she was right. I needed to breathe again. I stood in front of the mirror before leaving, a soft cream coat, my hair loose, a touch of lipstick. It wasn't for anyone else, it was for me. For the woman who'd been slowly fatting behind the routines, the dinners, the quiet waiting. When I reached the cafe, Manchester's evening drizzle had turned into a steady rain. The warm light from inside spilled onto the wet pavement like honey. The air smelled of roasted coffee and rain-soaked stone, a strangely comforting mix. "Table for 2, I told the host, shaking the droplets from my coat. "Isla's running a bit late," I added. He nodded politely and led me to a corner table by the window. The glass was fogged slightly, and through it, I could see the reflection of the city, blurred, soft, alive. I ordered a latte and pulled out my notebook. Sketches of unfinished building designs filled the pages, lines and curves, all incomplete. Just like me, I thought. Half finished, half seen. Minutes passed. Isla texted, "Running late, love, 5 minutes max." I smiled, tapping my fingers on the cup. And then it happened. The moment my life quietly changed. I was looking out the window when laughter drew my attention. 2 tables away near the glass sat a woman, elegant, confident, the kind of beauty that fills a room without trying. Her laughter was bright, almost musical. Across from her sat a man, tall, broad-shouldered, his face turned slightly away. I don't know why I looked twice. Maybe because something in his posture felt familiar. The way he leaned forward, the way his hand brushed his chin when he listened. It was Ethan. At first, my brain refused to accept it. It must be someone else. Coincidence, lighting, anything but what it looked like. But then he turned slightly, just enough for the cafe's soft light to hit his face. Ethan Cole. The man I'd built my world around. My breath caught. The air thickened. The sounds around me faded until it was just the pounding of my own heart in my ears. He looked happy. Not the tired, distracted man I'd been living with. He was smiling, effortlessly, the way he hadn't smiled with me in months. I couldn't move. Couldn't speak. I just sat there, frozen between disbelief and the painful clarity of recognition. Then she reached across the table, her fingers brushing his wrist, and that's when I saw it. The watch. My watch. Not identical. Not similar. The same one. Silver strap, black dial, and the engraving on the edge that caught the light just enough for me to see it. Never late again. E. I'd given it to him last year, wrapped with trembling hands and love in my eyes. He'd smiled then, kissed my forehead and said, "Now I'll always have your time with me." Now, another woman was wearing it, like a quiet confession sitting right there in plain sight. The world around me blurred. The chatter, the music, the sound of cups clinking, it all melted into a dull echo. It wasn't just betrayal. It was humiliation, quiet, public, suffocating. He wasn't supposed to see me, and he didn't. They were too lost in their little world. The woman leaned closer, laughing at something he said. Her fingers grazed the watch again. My pulse raced, but my hands were still. No tears. No scene. Just silence. I picked up my phone, not to call him, but to steady my shaking fingers. Isla texted again. "Traffic's mad, 2 more minutes." 2 minutes. That's all it took for my heart to finally break without a sound. I left cash on the table, untouched coffee beside it, and quietly walked out. The rain hit my face as I stepped outside, cold and sharp. It almost felt like the city was crying for me, or maybe cleansing me. I couldn't tell. I walked aimlessly through the streets. Past the same bookshop we bought our first flat-warming gift from. Past the florist where he once picked daisies for me, because roses are too predictable. Everything felt like a memory that didn't belong to me anymore. At one point, I stopped under a flickering streetlight and looked at my reflection in a shop window. Same woman, same eyes, same face, but something inside had shifted. It was subtle, but it was real. Like the moment before dawn, when the world holds its breath before changing color. And in that moment, I made a silent promise to myself. I wouldn't cry for someone who couldn't stay true. I wouldn't chase answers from a man who lied better than he loved. If this was the night that ended everything, then it would also be the night that began something new. When I reached home, Ethan was there already pretending. Sitting on the sofa, tie loosened, TV playing some late-night talk show. He looked up. "Hey, love, you're late, out with Isla." I stared at him for a moment, the image of him laughing with that woman still burning behind my eyes. But I smiled, calm, steady. "Yes," I said softly, "it was enlightening." He chuckled, oblivious. "Good, you needed that." I nodded, walking past him, my heart heavy but my voice light. "I did," I said quietly. "I really did." Then I went to my room, closed the door and sat in silence, not broken, not defeated, just awake. Awake to the truth, to the lies, to myself. That night, I didn't cry. Because deep down, I understood something I hadn't before. Sometimes, the worst thing someone can do to you is show you who they really are. And the best thing you can do in return is believe them. Morning sunlight streamed faintly through the blinds, slicing the quiet of my room into golden lines. For a moment, I just lay there, eyes open, heart heavy, mind still replaying what I'd seen the night before. The laughter. The watch. The way he smiled, not the forced, polite one he gave me lately, but the real one, the one I'd fallen in love with. It's strange, isn't it? The person you trust Most can become a stranger overnight. And yet, you still make breakfast for them in the morning because you don't know what else to do. Ethan walked into the kitchen around 8, adjusting his cufflinks, looking polished, calm, normal. "Morning, love," he said, pouring himself coffee. "You were up early." I didn't look up. Couldn't sleep. He paused, glancing at me, maybe searching for something in my tone. But I kept stirring the porridge like it was the most important thing in the world. "Rough night?" he asked. I smiled faintly. "You could say that." He leaned forward, kissing my cheek. "Long day ahead. I'll be late again tonight, presentation prep with Martin." Martin. His invisible business partner, always conveniently appearing whenever Ethan needed an excuse. I nodded. "Of course, you do what you have to." My voice didn't tremble, but my hands did. He didn't notice. He never really looked anymore. After he left, I stood by the window, watching his car pull away. A part of me wanted to scream, to run after him, demand the truth, throw every piece of evidence in his face. But another part, the quieter, stronger part, whispered, "Don't chase what's already running away." Instead, I sat down at my desk and opened my notebook. Not for work, but for clarity. I drew a line down the center of the page. On one side I wrote, "Love." On the other, "Truth." And under love, I began listing all the things I'd done to keep us together. Forgiving, waiting, understanding. Under truth, I wrote the things I'd ignored. Excuses, lies, late nights, the perfume, the watch. When I finished, I stared at the page, my throat tightening. The love side was full, paragraphs of effort. The truth side had only 5 words, but they carried more weight than all my love combined. "He's not the man you knew." At work, Mia noticed again. "You look different," she said, handing me a cup of tea. "Like you've made peace with something painful." I smiled weakly. Maybe peace isn't about forgetting. Maybe it's about accepting the truth and still choosing not to let it destroy you. She studied me for a moment, then nodded. "You're stronger than you think, Elara." I wanted to believe her. But strength doesn't come easily when your heart feels like it's been stitched back together with trembling hands. That week, Ethan's late nights became more frequent. Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Always the same excuse: meetings, deadlines, traffic. And I became an observer in my own life, quiet, steady, watching the man I loved drift further away. Every night, I'd make dinner, light the candles, then blow them out when the clock struck 11. It became a ritual, not of waiting, but of letting go, one flame at a time. Sometimes I'd stand by the window and look at the city lights reflecting in the rain. Each light felt like a tiny heartbeat, distant, flickering, alive somewhere else. And I realized so was he. One night, curiosity won over fear. I wasn't looking for drama, I just needed the truth. When he left, claiming another client dinner, I waited 15 minutes, then quietly followed. His car drove across the city, not toward his office, but toward the northern quarter, a place full of bars, galleries, hidden cafes. I parked a few streets away and watched from a distance as he got out, adjusted his coat, and entered a small, softly lit restaurant. Through the glass, I saw her, the same woman from the cafe. The one wearing the watch. She stood to greet him, smiling, her hand resting gently on his arm as they sat. I should have felt fury. But all I felt was stillness, the kind that comes when pain turns into understanding. I didn't confront him. Not that night. Not the next. Instead, I started detaching quietly. I stopped asking questions. Stopped making dinner. Stopped waiting by the window. Each small silence became a brick in the wall I was building, not between us, but around myself. A wall of peace. Of self-respect. One evening, while he was working late, I sat alone at the piano, the one we bought when we moved in together. I hadn't touched it in months. My fingers hovered over the keys before pressing softly, one note at a time. Music filled the room, fragile but alive. And for the first time in weeks, I cried not out of heartbreak but out of release. Because I realized something simple, something freeing. He might have taken my trust, but he can't touch my peace. When Ethan finally came home that night, I was calm. He smelled faintly of the same perfume, the one that wasn't mine. He dropped his keys on the counter and said, "You're still up." I nodded, couldn't sleep. He smiled, distracted. "You worry too much, Elara, everything's fine." I looked him in the eye, not angry, not broken, just clear. "Are you sure?" He froze for a moment, then forced a laugh. "Of course, why wouldn't it be?" I smiled gently. "No reason." Then I turned off the lights and walked to bed, leaving him standing there, unsure why her calm silence frightened him more than any accusation ever could. That night, as I lay in the dark, I whispered a quiet truth to myself. Sometimes, people think they're getting away with things because we've stopped reacting. But really, we've just stopped caring. And that's when I knew. Something inside me had changed forever. The night was soft, rain tapping against the glass like restless memories trying to get in. Elara sat by the window, tracing invisible circles on her cup of tea, waiting for Ethan's familiar text. "Working late again, love, don't wait up." It came right on time. Like clockwork. Like everything in his life seemed perfectly scheduled, perfectly controlled. But that night, something in Elara's chest felt off. She wasn't the paranoid kind. She'd always believed that love without trust wasn't love at all, it was a performance. But performances end when the curtain falls. And lately, she couldn't tell whether Ethan was still playing the same role or rehearsing for another stage. The next morning, she stood in front of the mirror, brushing her hair, lost in thoughts she didn't want to have. Her reflection looked calm, but her eyes looked like someone standing at the edge of realization. At breakfast, Ethan was there, dressed sharp, charming as ever, his tie slightly crooked. He smiled, poured her coffee, kissed her forehead, and said, "Big client meeting today. Don't wait up again, yeah." Her lips smiled, but her heart didn't follow. "Of course," she whispered. Days turned into weeks, and working late became overnight at the office. Small excuses turned into well-rehearsed stories. And Elara, though calm on the outside, began collecting silence like evidence. Every detail mattered now. The cologne that wasn't his. The faint lipstick smudge on a receipt. The sudden need to change passwords for company policy. Her intuition wasn't guessing anymore, it was remembering. Remembering the little things she'd ignored when she was too in love to question. One evening, she went to his office, unannounced. Just a quick visit, she told herself. She brought coffee, because that's what caring fiancés do. But the building was dark. The guard at the desk said Ethan had left 2 hours ago. Her smile didn't fade, it froze. She thanked him politely and turned away. The city lights blurred as she drove, every traffic signal turning red like a warning she didn't want to face. That night, when Ethan finally came home, he smelled like rain and something else. Something floral, faint and wrong. "Rough day?" she asked, her tone soft. "You have no idea," he replied, loosening his tie. Then he walked past her, kissed her cheek, and went straight to the shower. His phone buzzed on the counter. A message flashed briefly before fading away. It wasn't from work. It was a heart emoji, followed by, "Last night was perfect." Elara didn't touch the phone. Didn't scroll, didn't confront. She just stood there, still as silence. And in that stillness, something inside her shifted. Not anger. Not pain. But clarity. Because betrayal doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes, it just leaves traces like fingerprints on your piece. And that night, Elara realized something she'd never dared to admit before. You can't lose someone who was never really there. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply turned off the lights, walked to her room, and whispered to herself, "If love demands blindness, I'd rather see alone." That was the night Elara stopped waiting. Not for Ethan's messages, but for her own awakening. The late nights would continue, but not for her heartbreak. Now they would be for her healing. Rain, again. It had become the quiet soundtrack of Elara's evenings, the sound of the world weeping when her heart refused to. It was a Saturday, one of those gray English afternoons where time feels heavier, like it's waiting for something to happen. Elara had promised herself she wouldn't think about Ethan today. She had plans, coffee with a friend she hadn't seen in months, a quiet escape from the noise inside her mind. She dressed simply, beige coat, soft curls, a touch of lipstick, not for anyone else, but to remind herself she still existed beyond the hurt. The cafe smelled of rain and roasted coffee beans. Warm, gentle, alive. She found a corner table by the window, the kind she always loved, where she could see the street but stay unseen. Her friend, Myra, was running late. So Elara just sat there, watching people rush past, umbrellas clashing, laughter echoing, the world moving as if nothing had broken. And then time stopped. Across the cafe, at a table near the back, she saw him. Ethan. Her breath caught. No, it couldn't be. He had said he was flying to Bristol for a business meeting that morning. But there he was, smiling, relaxed, with a woman she had never seen before. They looked comfortable, too comfortable. The kind of ease that doesn't come from friendship. The kind that takes months of shared lies to build. Elara's first instinct was denial. Maybe it's work, maybe it's just a client. But then the woman laughed, a carefree, intimate laugh, and reached across the table. Her fingers brushed against Ethan's wrist. And that's when Elara saw it. The watch. Silver. Sleek. With a tiny scratch near the edge of the glass. The same scratch she remembered from the day Ethan dropped it on their balcony floor. Her heartbeat slowed. Every sound around her faded, the clinking of cups, the hum of conversations, the distant rain, everything vanished. Because that watch wasn't just similar. It was his. The same one she'd gifted him on their anniversary. Engraved underneath with the words, "To the man who makes time worth waiting for." She stared. For a long time. Not out of shock, but realization. The lies weren't whispers anymore. They were sitting across the room, wearing his smile, his promises, his time. Her hands trembled, but she didn't cry. Instead, a strange calmness settled over her. The kind that comes when the storm inside you finally finds its direction. She didn't confront him. Didn't march across the cafe, didn't cause a scene. She just sat quiet, observant, awakened. Because sometimes, the most powerful moment isn't when you catch the lie. It's when you stop needing the truth from the liar. Her phone buzzed. A message from Ethan. "Still stuck in Bristol. Miss you, love." Elara smiled faintly, not with bitterness, but with understanding. The kind of smile that said, "You just ended something you don't even realize you've lost." She paid her bill, stood up and walked out, her steps steady, her silence unshaken. Outside, the rain fell harder, washing away the last traces of denial. And for the first time in months, Elara didn't feel weak. She felt free. That night, she opened the drawer where she used to keep their pictures, their tickets, their memories. One by one, she placed them in a box. Not to destroy them, but to bury the version of herself who believed love meant enduring pain quietly. As the last photo slipped inside, she whispered to herself, "I gave you time, you gave me truth." And with that, Elara turned off the light, leaving behind not a broken heart, but a woman who finally chose peace over proof. Sometimes, the universe doesn't scream the truth, it shows it in silence. The moment you stop asking why is the moment you start healing. That night, Manchester slept under the sound of steady rain, but Elara didn't. Sleep had become a stranger to her since the cafe, where one glance changed everything. The image of that watch burned behind her eyelids. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw it shining on another woman's wrist, glowing like a truth she never asked for. Ethan's words echoed in her head. "You know I'd never lie to you. You're my future, Elara. I'm just working late, don't wait up." Funny how the same voice that once made her feel safe now made her doubt every memory attached to it. She sat by the window, watching the city lights blur through raindrops. Her phone lay on the table, silent, blank, lifeless. He hadn't called. Of course he hadn't. And for the first time, she didn't want him to. Because what would he say? Another excuse, another story about deadlines and traffic and missed flights. No. Elara didn't need his words anymore. She already had her answer, on the wrist of another woman. By morning, she felt something new. It wasn't anger. It wasn't heartbreak. It was clarity. She dressed for work with quiet purpose, a crisp white shirt, soft perfume, her hair tied back neatly. Looking in the mirror, she whispered to her reflection, "You're still you, he didn't take that away." Her job at the design firm had always been her second love, until Ethan made it her third. Now it was her lifeline. A world where effort still meant something, where promises were written in contracts, not half-truths. But as fate would have it, the office had its own surprises. Ethan worked in the same building, different floor, different department. They used to meet for coffee breaks, share lunch, plan weekends. Now, the very thought of seeing him felt like walking through glass. That afternoon, she saw him in the elevator. He looked surprised, maybe even guilty. "Hey, love," he said softly, as if nothing had changed. "Didn't expect to see you here." Elara smiled faintly. "You said you were in Bristol." For a second, he froze. Then came the practice smirk. "Oh yeah, that got canceled last minute. I thought I'd surprise you." Her heart wanted to scream, "Don't lie again." But her soul whispered, "Don't give him the satisfaction." So she just nodded and said, "You did." The elevator doors opened, and she walked out calm, poised, untouchable. That evening, Ethan came home with flowers. Roses, the same kind she once loved. He placed them on the table like peace offerings to a war he'd started. "Elara," he said, stepping closer, "I know I've been distant, been insane, She turned to face him. Her voice steady, her eyes unreadable. "Who is she?" Ethan blinked. "What?" "The woman at the cafe," she continued. "The one with your watch." Silence. It was the kind that kills illusions. He tried to speak, but she didn't let him. "Don't explain," she said softly. "Just tell me this, was any of it real?" He hesitated. That was all she needed. She stepped back, tears threatening to fall, but her tone remained calm. "I thought I knew what love meant. Turns out, I only knew what it looked like when it lies." Ethan reached for her hand, but she pulled away. Not out of anger, out of closure. That night, she didn't cry. She didn't throw things or beg for answers. She just sat on her bed, holding her own wrist, feeling her pulse. Alive. Steady. Strong. The same wrist that once gifted him that watch now held her truth. A week later, Elara moved out. No drama, no goodbye note. Just silence, the kind that echoes louder than any confrontation. Her friend Myra helped her pack. "You're really leaving him?" she asked softly. Elara smiled. "I'm not leaving him, I'm finding myself." As she closed the door for the last time, she looked back once, not in pain, but gratitude. Because some endings aren't punishments. They're protection. Sometimes, walking away isn't weakness, it's wisdom. The moment you stop begging for truth, you start living in it. Silence. It has a sound. If you've ever been truly heartbroken, you know it. It's not the absence of noise. It's the heavy, humming ache between breaths. the sound of your soul stitching itself back together, one quiet second at a time. For Elara Wynn, silence became her new companion. Not loneliness, silence. There's a difference. It had been 2 weeks since she left Ethan. No calls, no messages, no "I'm sorry." Just emptiness, which strangely felt peaceful. Her new flat was small, tucked near Deansgate in Manchester, a modest one-bedroom with creaky floors, pale walls, and a window that overlooked the city's heartbeat. There was no scent of his cologne here. No trace of broken promises. Only her, and the comforting hum of rain against the glass. The first few days were harder than she'd expected. The silence at night felt heavier. Every cup of coffee reminded her of shared mornings. Every song, every movie, carried echoes of him, like ghosts she couldn't quite exorcise. But day by day, the pain began to soften. Not because she forgot, but because she was remembering herself. She started running in the mornings again, headphones in, city lights still dim. She stopped checking her phone every 5 minutes. She smiled at strangers, not because she was ready to love again, but because she was finally learning how to live again. At work, people noticed the change. Her designs were bolder, cleaner, more personal. There was a quiet confidence in the way she spoke, the kind that comes from surviving what once destroyed you. Her boss, Mr. Davenport, called her into his office one afternoon. "Your new proposal," he said, holding her sketches. "It's different. It feels alive again. What happened?" Elara smiled softly. "I stopped designing for approval." He nodded, impressed. And just like that, she was promoted lead designer on a new international project. Irony, isn't it? While Ethan's lies broke her heart, her honesty rebuilt her future. That night, as she walked home, the city glowed under drizzle and neon. For the first time, she didn't feel lost among the crowd. She felt part of it. A moving, breathing, healing part of the world. Still, some nights the silence pressed harder, especially when memories came uninvited. The way he laughed, the warmth of his arms, the plans they made. But even those memories began to lose their sting. Because now they were lessons, not wounds. One evening, she sat on her balcony with a cup of chamomile tea. The city lights blinked like stars, scattered too close to earth. She opened her journal, something she hadn't done in months, and began to write. "Dear Silence, thank you for staying when everyone else left. You taught me that peace isn't found in people, it's built within." She paused, smiled, and continued writing, page after page, releasing everything she had carried. Words became her therapy. Writing became her new truth. Meanwhile, Ethan had tried reaching out. Missed calls. Short texts. Even a message that said, "I made a mistake." But Elara never replied. Because forgiveness didn't mean going back. It meant walking forward, lighter, stronger, wiser. Weeks passed. The silence began to sound like music. Her mornings had rhythm again, her evenings peace. One Friday, Myra came over with a bottle of wine. As they laughed and cooked together, Myra said, "You seem different, Elara, happier." Elara thought for a moment. "I'm not happier yet," she said softly, "but I'm no longer pretending to be." They clinked glasses, laughter filling the room, the kind that comes from women who have learned to heal themselves. Later that night, as rain whispered against the windows again, Elara whispered to herself before bed. "I thought silence meant loneliness. But it turns out, it's where I finally met myself." And for the first time in a long time, she slept peacefully. There's a point in healing when silence stops feeling empty and starts feeling sacred. For Elara Wynn, that point came quietly. No fireworks, no revelation. Just a moment of stillness when she realized she hadn't thought about Ethan all day. It was a Tuesday morning, cold, gray, and beautifully ordinary. She woke up to sunlight sneaking through her curtains, brewed her coffee, and sat by the window. Outside, the city moved on. And so had she. Elara had changed. Not in the loud, dramatic way movies show it, but in the subtle way life does it when you stop chasing what hurt you. Her laughter sounded lighter now. Her reflection looked stronger. Even her footsteps, once hesitant, now carried purpose. She started joining evening art classes, not to distract herself, but to rediscover the woman she used to be before love became a wound. Each brushstroke on the canvas felt like a breath of freedom. Her teacher, an elderly artist named Margaret, once told her, "Pain makes colors deeper, dear. The trick is to paint with it, not against it." Those words stayed with her. Every shade of blue she painted carried her sadness. Every streak of gold, her hope. One afternoon, she received an email. Subject line, collaboration proposal. It was from a luxury brand in London that had seen her recent design work online. They wanted her to lead a special creative campaign. For a moment, Elara just stared at the screen, disbelief flooding in. This was the kind of opportunity she once dreamt of sharing with Ethan. Now it was hers alone. She whispered to herself, maybe the silence wasn't punishment, maybe it was preparation. Weeks passed in a blur of work, late nights, and new beginnings. But silence always greeted her when she came home, gentle, familiar, grounding. It no longer felt like loneliness. It felt like peace wearing its truest form. Still, there were moments when memories returned, soft, uninvited, harmless. She didn't push them away. She simply smiled at them, the way you smile at an old wound that's finally stopped hurting. One evening, while cleaning her wardrobe, she found something she hadn't seen since the night she left, Ethan's watch box. The memory flickered instantly. The cafe, the other woman, the lies. For a second, the old ache returned. She sat down, holding the box. It felt heavy, not because of the metal inside, but because of what it represented: trust misplaced, time wasted. She opened it slowly. Inside was the engraved message. To the man who makes time worth waiting for. A small, bittersweet smile touched her lips. Then, instead of anger, a wave of gratitude filled her heart. She whispered, "You didn't keep time, Ethan, but you taught me how to stop wasting mine." With calm grace, she closed the box, placed it in a donation bag, and walked away. That night, she wrote in her journal again. Some people break you quietly. But healing, that's the loudest silence of all. Then she drew a small clock beside the words, its hands pointing to midnight, not as an end, but as a new beginning. The next day, Myra came over with coffee and a grin. "Guess who I saw today?" she said. "Ethan, he looked miserable." Elara laughed softly. "Oh. Yeah, he asked about you. I didn't say much, just told him you're doing better than ever." Elara smiled. "I hope he is too," she said gently. "We all deserve to learn our lessons one way or another." Myra nodded, impressed. "You've changed, Elara." "I had to," she replied. "Silence taught me more than love ever did." That evening, she stood by her balcony again, the same spot where she once watched her tears disappear into the rain. Now, the view looked different. Manchester glowed beneath her, alive and breathing. The city hadn't changed. She had. And in that moment, as wind brushed her face, Elara realized. She didn't need closure. She was the closure. The night was quiet, too quiet for a city that never truly slept. The faint hum of the streetlights outside Avery's apartment was the only sound that broke the silence. She sat by the window again, the same spot where, weeks ago, she'd held Ethan's watch and cried. But tonight, her eyes weren't filled with tears, they were sharp, calm, and unshakably steady. In front of her, a laptop screen glowed, filled with financial records, private messages, and voice logs she'd managed to extract from Ethan's company server. For weeks, Avery had been collecting proof, not of his betrayal alone, but of the entire game that had been played around her. Every click revealed another lie, another name, another friend who'd known the truth and said nothing. Her best friend Lara, the same person who had comforted her when she cried, had been helping Ethan hide his affair. The realization didn't make Avery cry anymore. It made her smile bitterly. Trust, she whispered to herself, isn't something you lose once. It dies in pieces. Earlier that day, she had gone back to the office, not as the same Avery who used to avoid eye contact and quietly do her work, but as the one who now walked with a quiet kind of power. Everyone noticed it. The whispers stopped when she passed by. Ethan wasn't there, he was out on a business trip. But Avery knew where he really was, a beach resort 2 hours away, with Sophie, the woman she'd once thought was just his client. What Ethan didn't know was that Avery had access to his business email, his company's internal chat logs, and even the presentation files he'd been working on. It wasn't revenge she wanted. It was truth, in its purest, most painful form. That evening, she sent an anonymous package to the company's board of directors, containing evidence of Ethan's embezzlement, data theft, and the affair that had leaked client secrets. She didn't attach her name. She didn't need to. The truth had its own voice. At 3 a.m., her phone buzzed. A message from Lara. Avery, please, I didn't mean to hurt you. He said he'd ruin my career if I didn't help him. I didn't have a choice. Avery stared at the message for a long time. Then she typed back slowly. There's always a choice. You just chose yourself. And she hit send. She didn't block Lara, not yet. Because sometimes, silence is the punishment that echoes louder than anger. By sunrise, the world had already started to shift. Ethan's name was trending on business blogs. The company's board had suspended him pending investigation. And Lara? She was gone, her resignation letter sent hours before the chaos began. Avery made herself a cup of coffee and stood in front of the mirror. The same woman stared back, but something was different. Her reflection didn't look broken anymore. It looked reborn. She whispered, the hardest part about being strong is pretending you were never weak. Then her phone rang, an unknown number. She hesitated before answering. Miss Avery, a male voice spoke. This is Nathan Cole from The Observer. We received a leaked story about corporate fraud and betrayal at Hellion Tech. Would you be available for a statement? Avery smiled faintly. No, she said calmly. But you can quote this. Truth always finds its way out, no matter how many lies try to bury it. Later that afternoon, she received an email from a private number, only one sentence. You think you've won, but this isn't over. No name, no signature, but Avery didn't need one. She knew it was Ethan. She leaned back in her chair and whispered under her breath. It's over for you. For me, it's just beginning. And for the first time in months, she closed her laptop, not to escape reality, but to finally face it. Because the truth wasn't her weakness anymore. It was her weapon. The morning after the storm felt strangely peaceful. The world outside Avery's window looked the same, calm, familiar, but she knew everything had changed. Ethan's name was on every financial blog. News anchors called it the betrayal scandal that rocked Hellion Tech. She watched quietly, sipping her coffee, her reflection caught between sunlight and shadow. There was no victory in her eyes, just calm acceptance. Because some battles aren't won with applause, they're won in silence, when the truth finally breathes free. At noon, a knock broke her thoughts. When she opened the door, she froze. Ethan stood there, unshaven, sleepless, and broken. Avery, he began softly, his voice almost pleading. I need to talk. Avery didn't move. She simply looked at him, the man who once swore she was his forever. Now, he was just a stranger with familiar eyes. You've said enough, she replied quietly. But Ethan didn't leave. Please, just 5 minutes, that's all I'm asking. She hesitated, then stepped aside. He walked in, the same apartment where their laughter once filled the air. But now, the silence between them felt heavier than walls. I never meant for things to go this far, Ethan said. I made mistakes, stupid ones, but you weren't supposed to get hurt like this. Avery laughed softly, not with humor but disbelief. Mistakes, she repeated. You lied, you stole, you destroyed everything we built, and you call that a mistake. Ethan's voice cracked. I was scared. Scared of losing control, scared of being nothing. Sophie made me feel powerful. You made me feel small. Avery stepped closer, her eyes burning through his excuses. No, Ethan, I made you feel seen. You just weren't ready to be honest about who you really were. For a moment, he looked like he wanted to fall apart. His lips trembled as if he wanted to say, I'm sorry, but even he knew it was too late for that. You exposed me, he said bitterly. No, Avery replied. You exposed yourself, I just stopped hiding it for you. He looked around her apartment, the photos, the books, the quiet order of her life without him. So what now? You think you've won? Avery smiled faintly. There's no winning in betrayal, there's only surviving. He turned toward the door, anger flashing in his eyes. You'll regret this. Avery didn't flinch. Maybe, she said softly, but regret hurts less than pretending. As he walked away, the air in the room felt lighter. She didn't cry, didn't shout, because healing doesn't always come with noise. Sometimes it comes in stillness, when you finally stop explaining yourself to people who never listened. Days passed. The company issued a statement clearing Avery of all involvement. She was offered a higher position, but she refused. She didn't want power, she wanted peace. Instead, she opened a small consulting firm, one that helped whistleblowers safely report fraud and harassment. She called it Verity, meaning truth. Each client that walked through her door reminded her of the night she decided to stop being a victim and start being her own voice. One afternoon, while sorting through case files, she found Ethan's old watch, the one she'd held the night she discovered his betrayal. She turned it over in her hand. The back read, Always yours. A smile touched her lips. Not anymore, she whispered and placed it in a donation box. It wasn't bitterness, it was closure. Weeks later, Avery stood by the ocean, the wind carrying the scent of salt and renewal. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply. The world was wide again, not broken, just real. A little girl nearby was building a sandcastle. When the waves washed it away, she laughed and started rebuilding. Avery watched her for a long time and thought, that's life. The waves will come, but so will new beginnings. That night, she wrote a note in her journal. Healing isn't forgetting what happened. It's remembering it without breaking. She put down her pen, looked up at the stars, and smiled. For the first time in a long time, her heart wasn't whispering pain. It was whispering peace. And that silence was louder than any apology Ethan could ever give. The city was dressed in gold that morning, the kind of light that spills softly through tall glass windows and paints everything with quiet hope. Avery stood by her office window, coffee in hand, watching Manchester slowly come alive. It had been 6 months since Ethan walked out of her apartment. 6 months since the truth burned everything she thought was permanent. And yet, here she was, not broken, not bitter, just beautifully changed. The nameplate on her desk now read, Elara Wynn, founder, Verity Consulting. Each letter of that title carried a story, not of success, but survival. Her office wasn't large, but it felt alive. Plants lined the shelves. A small record player played soft jazz in the background. On the wall hung a framed quote she once wrote on a napkin. The truth doesn't ruin lives, it rebuilds them differently. That line had become Verity's motto. Her firm had already helped 3 major whistleblowers safely expose corporate fraud. Each one had come to her trembling, afraid, and left stronger. Sometimes, Avery wondered if helping others find their voice was her own quiet form of redemption. That morning, her assistant, Chloe, walked in holding a file. Morning, Avery. We've received another case. It's from Hellion Tech. Avery froze for a second. The name still carried a sting, even after everything. Hellion, she asked calmly, setting her cup down. Chloe nodded. Yes, and it's serious. Internal leaks, false financials, sounds familiar. Avery smiled faintly. History has a strange sense of humor. She opened the file, scanning the pages, until her eyes landed on the name of the contact person, Sophie Leeton. For a moment, the world went quiet. The same Sophie. The woman who once wore Ethan's watch. Chloe noticed the flicker in Avery's eyes. "Do you want me to handle this one?" Avery looked out the window again. Rain clouds were gathering, how poetic, she thought. "No," she said finally. "I'll take this myself." Her voice wasn't angry. It was steady, calm, the tone of someone who had already faced the storm and learned to walk through it. Later that afternoon, Avery met Sophie in a small cafe near Deansgate. The air smelled of roasted coffee and wet pavements. Sophie looked nervous, eyes tired, hands fidgeting around her cup. When she saw Avery, she hesitated. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I almost didn't," Avery said quietly, taking a seat across from her. "But here we are." Sophie swallowed hard. "Avery, before we talk business, I need to say something. I'm sorry. I didn't know the truth about you back then. Ethan told me you were the one cheating. He said you were manipulative, cold." Avery's expression didn't change, and you believed him. Sophie nodded, shame in her eyes. "I did, until I saw what he did to others too. He's gone now, vanished abroad, but the company's still rotting from the inside, and I can't stay silent anymore." For a moment, neither spoke. The rain outside began to fall harder, blurring the city lights into soft streaks of silver. Avery finally said, "So you want to expose them?" "Yes," Sophie whispered. "I want to make it right." Avery looked at her, really looked. There was no hate left, only a quiet understanding. Betrayal had connected them once through pain. Maybe truth could now connect them through purpose. "Then we'll do it," Avery said. "But this time we do it the right way." As they talked through the details, Avery felt something strange inside her. Not revenge, not resentment, but release. It was as if confronting Sophie had unlocked the last piece of her healing. The circle was closing, not in bitterness, but in balance. When she returned to her office later that evening, Chloe was still there, typing. "You look peaceful," Chloe said with a small smile. Avery nodded, "Because I finally realized something." "What's that?" "That forgiveness isn't about giving someone a second chance," she said softly. "It's about freeing yourself from needing an explanation." She stood by the window again, watching the rain ease into drizzle. Manchester glowed, every streetlight reflected on wet roads like tiny stars. Her phone buzzed, a text from a journalist she'd worked with before. "Avery, Hellion Tech's internal truth bomb about to drop. You'll want to see this." She smiled. It wasn't satisfaction, it was closure, arriving like a whisper rather than a thunderclap. That night, Avery wrote in her journal, "Sometimes, the people who break you are just the universe's way of clearing space for who you're meant to become." She closed the journal gently, exhaled, and let the silence wrap around her like a soft blanket. For the first time in years, the light in her apartment felt warm again, not because someone was there to love her, but because she'd learned to love herself, even after the wreckage. The night the news broke, Avery didn't watch it live. She didn't need to. The world didn't have to tell her that the truth had finally found its voice. She could feel it. In the silence of her apartment, in the calm rhythm of her heartbeat, in the way the wind touched her window, she knew. Hellion Tech had fallen. Not in flames, not in scandalous drama, but in quiet accountability. Documents surfaced, lies were traced, and every deceit Ethan once built came undone like a thread pulled from a fabric too tight to hold. Avery sat on her sofa, cup of tea in hand, as her phone buzzed again and again, journalists, old colleagues, even strangers sending messages of admiration. But she didn't reply. She didn't need applause. Because real healing never asks to be witnessed, it just is. The next morning, Avery visited her old office building for the first time since everything fell apart. The receptionist still remembered her, eyes soft, smile warm. "Miss Wynn," she said gently, "you look radiant." Avery smiled. "That's what peace does to you." As she rode the lift up, each floor chimed like a heartbeat, familiar yet distant. When the doors opened, the same corridors stretched before her, but they no longer carried the weight of her past. She stopped outside what used to be Ethan's office, now locked, his nameplate gone. A cleaning worker passed by and said, "He left in a hurry, didn't even clear his desk." Avery simply nodded. "Some people run from the mess they make," she murmured, "and some people rebuild after it." Later that day, she walked to a small park near the River Irwell, the same place she and Ethan once spent lazy Sunday afternoons dreaming about their future. The air was crisp, filled with the sound of children laughing, joggers passing, dogs chasing after sticks. Life moving on unbothered. She sat on a bench, watching ripples on the water. In her journal, she wrote, "You can't control how people love you, but you can control how you heal after they don't." She closed her eyes and smiled, not the smile of forgetting, but of remembering without pain. That evening, she hosted a small gathering at her office, the team that helped her build Verity, the survivors, the truth-tellers. The air was full of laughter, clinking glasses, and the kind of joy that doesn't demand perfection, just peace. Chloe raised a toast. "To Avery, the woman who taught us that silence can be louder than revenge." Avery chuckled softly. "To truth," she replied, "and to the strength we find when we stop proving our worth to people who never valued it." The room erupted in gentle applause, but Avery's gaze wandered to the window, where the city lights shimmered like hope reborn. Later, when everyone had left, she stayed behind, music playing low, the hum of streetlights outside. She took one last sip of champagne and whispered to herself. "You did it," quietly, gracefully, completely. On her desk lay a single letter unsigned, but she knew who it was from. Ethan. She hesitated, then unfolded it. "Avery, I've lost everything, and maybe that's what I deserved. But losing you, that's the one thing that will haunt me. I hope one day you can forgive me, not for me, but for your own peace." She read it twice, then placed it back in the envelope. No anger, no tears, just stillness. Then she walked to the window, opened it slightly, and let the letter drift out into the cold night air. It danced briefly in the wind before disappearing into the dark, like the last echo of a chapter finally closed. A few weeks later, Verity was featured in a national magazine. The headline read, "From Betrayal to Bravery, How Elara Wynn Built an Empire on Truth." When she saw it, she smiled, not because she wanted fame, but because she knew the story wasn't about her. It was about every woman who'd ever been lied to, underestimated, or silenced, and still found a way to rise. That evening, Avery visited the same cafe where she'd once seen Sophie laughing, the night her world had shattered. She ordered tea, sat by the window, and watched people come and go. The city hummed softly, the air filled with stories, endings, beginnings, and the quiet in-betweens. As she left, she passed by a young woman crying into her phone. Avery paused, gently placed a napkin on her table, and said, "Whatever you're losing right now, one day you'll thank it for leaving." Then she smiled and walked away. "He told me he was working late. And for a long time, I believed him. But what I didn't realize back then was that he was working late. Just not on love or truth or us. He was building the lesson that would one day rebuild me. Because sometimes, the people who break your heart are just paving the way for you to meet yourself. Stronger, wiser, freer. And if you ever find yourself standing in the ruins of what was, don't be afraid to start again. You are not the things that hurt you. You are everything you chose to become after.